Finally, Fujifilm has released the firmware 3.1 for the Fuji X-S20. This firmware will allow this camera to have better autofocus than before. They revised the autofocus system for this camera with this firmware, and I've talked about this firmware back in October during the Paris Photo Fair. We got this firmware for the Fuji X-H2S last month, and today we get it for the X-S20 that I'm using here and for some other cameras from Fujifilm such as the Fuji X-T5. Hello everyone, I hope you are all good. I'm Photorabs, a portrait photographer based in France, and I like creating content about cameras, photography, filmmaking, content creation, and so on. If you are interested in these topics, I highly appreciate if you go subscribe to my channel. That's a massive help. And now I'm using the Fuji X-S20 here along with the Sigma 16mm 1.4. At 1.4 I'm recording the screen as well, so I might look a little bit up to the monitor to see if the autofocus is good. I have set the autofocus to eye auto detect, continuous autofocus, and I'm going to test it throughout of this video in several conditions, indoors and outdoors, so you know exactly if this firmware is any good or if it is better than before. Although I have lots of cameras in my home studio, I have Nikon full frames, I have Sony APS-C and full frames, and I have Fujifilm cameras, but this one, the X-S20, has a special place in my heart because with this camera I took the last portraits of my mom before she passed away. So I decided not to sell this camera whatsoever. I decided to keep using it and to keep protecting it and keep it in front of me every day when I'm doing my videos, or even if I'm not doing my videos, if I'm editing, this camera is around because I captured my mother's smile with this camera before she passed away. I was using it as my main camera for my YouTube videos, but the autofocus was not so good. I tried everything, all the settings possible on this camera, and the autofocus was not so good for YouTube. I mean, you can work around with it, you can use it, it's very usable, but it was hunting a lot, so I got lots of comments why you are using this camera while you have some better cameras with better autofocus. But the reason why is that this camera has lots of place in my heart and I will keep using it. But then I decided to put it a little bit on the side so I can use some other cameras to avoid that hunt, especially when I'm showcasing products. This camera was hunting a lot. Although I know that this camera has an autofocus that was hunting a lot, but I kept using it. I saw those hunts in my videos. This camera was staying on this side as a main camera, now I put it on the side. But well, for me that was not a big deal because my YouTube videos are not like Netflix series or documentaries or movies and so on. So for me that was not a big problem. And I know that I won't be using it for my professional work, for my clients and so on, because I don't want that focus hunt during my videos. And that was the main issue with this camera. Although I kept using it, but I had in my mind like, why we are having this? We need a better camera with a better autofocus that would be way better for me and for other creators and filmmakers out there. Even in photos, we had like that false positive, we had like the square on the face, but the subject was not in focus, and that was really frustrating. You cannot work with this tool, but I kept using it. I made my best to use this camera because I love this Fuji X-S20. And finally we got this firmware and I tried it, and I just checked some footage on my computer and the results are way better than before. Let me know your thoughts down below. Now I'm having the two screens, you can see them, what the camera is seeing and the final footage on the side, so you can judge by yourself if this firmware is any better than before. I'm waiting your comments down below. And now let's do like the basic test in my home studio. Now we have the 16mm 1.4. And I have the auto eye detect, so the focus is jumping from an eye to another. I think it's calculating which one is closer. And normally I won't use it with the eye detect in my home studio. I keep it on the face detect and not the eye detect to reduce that focus hunt as much as possible. But now I can see that the square is following my face, my eye very good. Okay, it lost me a little bit, but then everything is working well, and I'm not going to do these fast moves in front of my cameras. This camera, although the firmware is now way better than before, but I still cannot use it for my wedding events and so on because I'm afraid that this autofocus will hunt. So that's why I'm trying to do these tests here. And let's see if we put something in front of the camera. Okay, we saw that hunt here. If I take it out, okay, it is snapping very well on the face, on the eye. That's so nice. And let us try with something a little bit different, because later on I'll be trying some other lenses outdoors. I'll be trying the Tamron 11 to 20 millimeters 2.8 and the VILTROX 27 millimeters 1.2. Nice. Perfect. Although this camera is compact, lightweight, it's very suitable for vlogs, even though now my setup is a bit heavy because I have an external monitor to record what the camera is seeing. I have also the Tamron 11 to 20 millimeters f2.8. So this camera is very suitable for vlogs, and I stopped using it because of the autofocus. It was hunting a lot. So now let's see with this new firmware 3.1 if this issue has been resolved. What do you think about the footage so far? Let me know your thoughts down below, because previously I noticed that the autofocus was good, but it was hunting a lot. And that was the main reason why I stopped using this one for vlogs. But now I think, after I checked the firmware on the Fuji X-H2S, and I think they made the exactly same thing here, we still have some hunts, but that's so acceptable. So let me know your thoughts down below in a vlogging situation. If you are using this setup, would you consider vlogging with it again? This is the question. So this is the test that I'm doing with this 11 to 20 millimeters on this Fuji X-S20, because normally when I'm doing my vlogs outdoors, I try to come to the camera, and I'm trying just to make the same kind of moves that I do when I'm using this camera for vlogs. So I might go away from the camera, I might come to the camera like this, I might go to the side, and I might go away from the camera like this, and then I might appear. So what do you think about this test? On my monitor here, it looks very good, by the way. I can see that square on my eye, but we all know that does not mean anything, because we had that false positive before. So what do you think about the autofocus with the new firmware 3.1 on this Fuji X-S20? As you can see now, the sun is just behind, so let us see if this camera can keep the focus on me, on my eye, I have it set to auto eye detection for the autofocus. So let's do this test and let me know what do you think about that down below. Well, according to what I'm seeing on the monitor here, it looks very solid. So if this is the case, that means that I will be using this camera much more often in 2025 for vlogs, because I have more lenses for the Fuji system than for the Sony, because I'm switching a little bit to Sony recently and I really love this Tamron 11 to 20 millimeters. Let's stay here to make, okay, I'm gonna do the thumbnail here. I know that you might say that you are using now the Tamron 11 to 20 millimeters on f2.8, but you would like to see a wider aperture with this firmware update. So now I will jump to the 27 millimeters 1.2 from VILTROX, and of course there are lots of people that will say this camera will work better with native lenses, but I will be using the 27 millimeters from VILTROX to test this autofocus outdoors. I am now with the VILTROX 27mm 1.2 and a variable ND filter on top of it from Canada F Concept, by the way, link down below, on this Fuji X-S20 and the latest firmware 3.1 and the same exact autofocus settings. I use this lens to make some talking headshots and to make some B-rolls. So this is not a vlogging lens, it's heavy, it's big, it's not compact. So let's see if the autofocus can keep up with this lens. As I said before, it's not a native lens, but this is one of my favorite lenses for the APS-C cameras for this Fuji X-S20 and the Fuji X-H2S. So what do you think about that? Let's do the basic autofocus test. And if I'm looking a little bit higher than the lens, is because I have the onboard recorder that I have here. It's recording what the camera is saying, so I'm just checking if everything is fine. And if I turn, by the way, I'm recording the audio with the Saramonic Ultra. So if I turn my face, I have it set to auto eye detect. So once again, I'm trying to make the kind of tests, the kind of use that I have for this camera. That means walking away from it, turning to the camera, coming forward to the camera, going to the sides or to the other side. Yeah, what do you think about that? Let me know down below. And now let's go back to the studio because it's freezing cold here. To be honest, I checked some footage on my computer, whether from the indoor intro that I recorded or the videos that I took outdoors. And I noticed that the autofocus now is way better than before. It has been improved a lot, but I still can see some hunts from time to time. It's not that this camera is not reliable or the autofocus is not accurate. It's not about that. It's, well, we can work around, and most of the clients will not notice those hunts at all. That's in my opinion. Let me know your thoughts about that down below. But for me, I think that these hunts are now acceptable. I wish that we can improve the autofocus a little bit more, because we as clients, as consumers, we deserve the best of the best. We are buying a camera with lenses, we are relying on this camera because it's a tool to create content, to create photos, to create videos, and we need this tool to work as it should be. It is not perfect, it can be better. I don't know if they can improve in the firmware or we have to wait for the XS30, maybe later on in 2025 or early 2026. But yeah, This firmware now is way better than before. We have lots of improvements in terms of autofocus, in terms of speed of autofocus, in terms of tracking, in terms of like, you know, the hunt is way less than before. That's at least in my opinion, in my kind of use, in my type of video recording with this camera. I'm really curious to see your thoughts down below if you have used this camera or if you tried this firmware on some other cameras such as the X-T5. That's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it. But hey Fuji, before I finish this video, there is a message for you. If you're watching my video, please go do something about the audio. We should not go every time to the audio settings of the camera just to go there and then to go back in order to let the camera redial our settings for the audio. And that's really frustrating. I don't know why we still have this, because every time I turn off the camera and I turn it on, I have to go to the menu settings to do nothing, just to see what's happening there, and then go back, and then we can get back all the settings that we dialed for the audio on this camera. And that's not something that we have to encounter when we are using Fujifilm cameras. We didn't have that before. We started to have this, I remember on the Fuji X-H2S, it was maybe the firmware 6 from the or maybe the firmware 5, something like that. And this issue is on all the Fuji cameras apparently, and that's really frustrating. So please Fuji, if you're watching, or if someone knows someone in Fuji, send him this video, because they should do something about that. That's not something that we can rely on for our YouTube studio. Of course, we can go to our DaVinci Resolve and we can adjust the audio levels, but since we can do this in camera, why we have to do an extra step later on in post-processing? So Fujifilm, if you are listening, you have to do something about that, because we are tired of these small errors or small like So Fuji, if you are listening, you have to do something about that. You've been working on the firmware for the autofocus. It's way better than before. It's not perfect yet. You can do better, but you have to work also on the audio levels, because that's a shame. And thank you for watching. Ciao for now.